Welcome back, everyone, to the Seniors Confessions channel. My mother-in-law married a 25-year-old man. They stayed locked in their room for 8 straight days. One night, I heard someone crying for help. My husband and I broke down the door and were horrified by the sight before us. My name is Latu. From the outside, many would think I am a lucky woman. I have a husband, a child, and I live in a spacious house in a busy neighborhood. Neighbors often tell me that having such a stable home is better than most people have. Every time I hear that, I just smile. Because only those living in that house understand that some pressures don't show on walls or bank accounts, but silently weigh on one's heart for years. My mother-in-law's name is Bitch Wei. She is over 50 years old and has been a widow for over 10 years. Since my father-in-law passed away early, she worked hard alone to raise my husband, Dewey Khan, into a grown man. In the eyes of our relatives, she is the model of a strong, capable, and respectable woman. Every family gathering, everyone praises her for being self-sacrificing and dedicated to the family. I have never denied her contributions, but you only understand when you live together. She loves to control everything, from how slippers are placed at the door and how clothes are folded in the closet, to how many spoons of salt go into a pot of soup. Everything must meet her standards. What tires me the most is that she never yells or scolds loudly like many other mothers-in-law. No, she always speaks very gently, but every sentence is as sharp as a thin blade, enough to make the listener feel a sting in their heart. Once, during a family memorial, I carried a tea tray to serve guests, and just because I accidentally filled the cups a bit too high, she laughed and said in front of everyone, "Daughters-in-law these days are really something." I guess no one at home taught her how to host guests. Everyone laughed along, and I had to laugh too, but inside, I felt like I had been splashed with boiling water. At times like that, I only know to remain silent because I understand that if I react, I will be the one judged in the end. In my 3 years of marriage, I've learned to swallow harsh words and tell myself that every family has its frictions, so I should just endure a little for the sake of peace. My husband is Dewey Khan. He is not a bad man. I even see him caring for his wife and child often, but he has one major weakness. He is terrified of making his mother sad. Whenever I offer feedback regarding her, he just sighs and says, "Please try to understand my mother." Or, "Mom is old now. What does it cost to just yield to her a little?" At first, I tried to explain, but later I grew tired of talking, because I knew that no matter what, I would be the one to give in. Once, after a large family gathering, I washed dishes until past 10 p.m., my limbs exhausted and my back aching. Just as I sat down to rest, Mrs. Wei walked out of her room. She looked at the pile of fruit on the table and said slowly, "Back in my day, at your age, I managed the whole family of 8 alone without a single complaint." Having said that, she walked away without scolding or blaming, but it was enough to make me feel like I was in the wrong. The only thing that has helped me endure all these years is my daughter, Society. She is 5 years old this year, bright, and very loving toward her mother. Every time she sees me sad, she hugs my neck and whispers, "Mom, don't cry. I love you." Just hearing those words makes all the bitterness in my heart soften. I tell myself to just try a little harder for my child Sake. At least she still gets to grow up in a home with both her grandparents and parents. But then things happened that made it impossible to keep quiet, no matter how much I wanted to. About a month ago, I began to notice that my mother-in-law seemed quite different. At first, they were just small changes. She started spending much more time in front of the mirror. Her familiar dark-colored clothes were gradually replaced by bright-colored dresses. She began dyeing her hair, taking care of her skin, using perfume, and often smiling to herself while looking at her phone. Every time a message arrived, her eyes would light up like a girl who had just fallen in love. At first, I thought she must have joined some social group, which was why she was in such a good mood. I was even happy for her. After so many years of widowhood, if she found her own joy, it was a precious thing. But as time went on, those signs became increasingly unusual. Once, while we were eating, her phone vibrated, and just by looking at the screen, her face turned bright red. She hurriedly stood up and took the phone into her room. Another day, I saw a delivery person bring a huge bouquet of flowers. When I asked who sent them, she just smiled and said, "Someone who cares about me sent them." After saying that, she carefully carried the bouquet to her room and locked the door. Even Khan started to notice that change. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, he turned to me and asked, "Do you think Mom has been acting strange lately?" I laughed. "You noticed it too?" Khan frowned, pondered for a moment, then said, "I wonder what's going on." At that time, neither of us expected that those seemingly harmless changes were just the beginning, the start of the biggest storm to ever hit our family. And just a few days later, during a seemingly normal dinner, my mother-in-law said something that left both me and Khan stunned. She set her chopsticks down, adjusted her newly dyed hair, and smiled. A smile that I can still remember clearly to this day. She said, "I'm letting you both know in advance so you can prepare yourselves. I am getting married." As soon as those words fell, it was as if someone had drained all the sound from the dining table. I stood by the table, still holding the ladle, but my body had frozen. Dewey Khan was picking up a piece of fish but stopped midway. Little Society, sitting next to me, looked back and forth between her grandmother and her parents in confusion. Perhaps she didn't understand what getting married meant, she just felt the atmosphere in the house suddenly become very strange. Khan set his bowl down, looked at his mother for a long time, then managed to ask, "What did you say?" My mother-in-law was not flustered at all. On the contrary, she sat up even straighter, her hand gently smoothing her brown-dyed hair, her voice as calm as if she were announcing she was going to the market to buy more meat. "I said I'm getting married. I've thought it through carefully, it's not an impulsive decision." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice very gentle. Who is that person, Mom?" Mrs. Wei looked at me, her gaze instantly turning a little colder, as if that very normal question had offended her. She replied slowly, "His name is Hai Dang, he is 25 years old." Hearing that, Dewey Khan sat straight up. 25 years old? Mom, are you mistaken? He's even a few years younger than me. Mrs. Wei slammed her chopsticks down on the table. The sound of the chopsticks hitting the wooden surface wasn't loud, but it was enough to startle Little Society, who leaned closer to me. She looked straight at Khan, her voice dropping. "So what if he's younger? Does age determine whether we can nurture feelings? Do you think a woman over 50 like me no longer has the right to be loved by anyone?" Khan choked on his words. I could clearly see his face go pale, both shocked and afraid of hurting his mother. I knew that if I said the wrong thing at that moment, everything would immediately be blamed on me. So I tried to choose my words carefully. "It's not that we object to you having a companion, I just think marriage is a big step, so we should look into it a bit more carefully." Mrs. Wei gave a cold smile. "You speak so nicely, don't you? What exactly is there to look into? Should I dig up his family tree for 3 generations? Or are you afraid that I'm old and senile, being seduced by a young man?" That remark made me fall silent. Clearly, I had never said anything of the sort, but she had pushed the conversation toward me looking down on her. Khan hurriedly interjected. "Mom, Tu didn't mean it that way. We're just worried about you." Mrs. Wei turned to her son, her eyes reddening quickly. "Worried about me? How many years have I lived alone? Has anyone truly asked how sad I am? You have your own small families, with husbands, wives, and children. What about me? I lie in my room alone. When I'm sick, I take my own medicine, and I swallow both my joy and my sorrow alone. Now that someone loves me, you look at me as if I've done something shameful." Hearing that, my heart sank as well. It is true that there are lonely moments for the elderly that children and grandchildren often fail to fully see, but despite my sympathy, I still felt a very clear sense of unease in my heart. A 25-year-old man dating a woman in her 50s and wanting to marry her so soon. That cannot be considered normal. Khan asked in a lower voice, "How long have you known him, Mom?" Mrs. Wei was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Nearly 3 months." Khan frowned. 3 months and you're getting married already?" She snapped back immediately. "Back in the day, people met a few times and still got married. You kids today are suspicious of everything, that's why you're so tired." Then she turned to me, her voice sounding triumphant. "Dang isn't like the men my age. He knows how to listen, how to care, and how to say things that warm your heart. Most importantly, he doesn't treat me like an outsider in the house." I put my chopsticks down, my hands unconsciously tightening. I understood she was making a jab at me. In her mind, perhaps we had let her be lonely for too long, so now she's using this marriage to prove her worth. But the more she does, the more I worry she's being preyed upon for her weaknesses. She said she met Hai Dang during a gathering for middle-aged women. At first, he just helped her carry her bag and asked if she was tired, then he frequently texted goodnight and sent old songs she liked. One rainy day, he stood waiting at the gate for nearly an hour, just to hand her a bottle of massage oil, saying, I was afraid your joints might ache." Her eyes lit up as she recounted each detail. I looked at her, feeling both pity and worry. The woman who was once sharp, never missing a small fault in her daughter-in-law, was now softened by a few sweet words of care. Then she unexpectedly added, "Dang even went as far as suggesting a prenuptial agreement." I froze. What kind of agreement? She lifted her chin slightly, as if that were proof of Hai Dang's innocence. "He said it was to give me peace of mind. My assets remain my own. He doesn't demand the house or my savings books. Both sides are being clear with each other. He only receives a fixed living allowance." Hearing the words, living allowance, a chill ran down my spine. Someone who says they don't need money but takes the initiative to draft a contract to receive it monthly. How can this not be suspicious? I tried to ask further. "Have you signed it yet, Mom?" She looked at me immediately, her eyes narrowing sharply. "I'm not foolish enough to let my daughter-in-law lecture me, and I don't need you controlling my life either." Khan rubbed his forehead. "Mom, if he's sincere, just let us meet and talk more first. Marriage can't be rushed." Ms. Wei gave a sad smile. "I know. In your eyes, I'm old, and anyone I love becomes a joke. But let me say this first. Once I've decided, no one can stop me." Just then, the doorbell rang. I stood up to open the door. At the gate was a tall young man in a white shirt, holding a large bouquet of yellow lilies. His face was bright, his smile gentle, and he was so polite it was hard to find fault. He bowed to greet me. "Hello, too, I'm Hai Dang. I've come today to ask for the chance to meet you both in little society." Before I could answer, my mother-in-law hurried out from the house. Her voice softened completely. "You're here, my dear." That single word, dear, left me stunned. She looked at him with an expression I had never seen her give anyone in this house. It was full of trust, pride, and something akin to desperation. Hai Dang walked into the living room, set the flowers down, and bowed respectfully to Dewey Khan. "Hello. I know the news about your mother and me is a surprise, but I am sincere. I don't expect you to believe me right away. I just want the chance to prove it." After speaking, he turned to Little Society and took a small teddy bear from his bag. "This is for you, Society." Little Society looked at me timidly. I nodded slightly. The child then reached out to take it. Hai Dang smiled very gently, but for a moment as he looked up, I caught his gaze darting quickly across the living room, over the wooden cabinet against the wall, then lingering on the drawer where my mother-in-law kept the filing cabinet keys. It was just a flash, very quick, but enough to make my heart sink. If someone truly came for affection when visiting a house for the first time, they should be observing people and the family's reaction. But aside from the polite smile on his lips, Hai Dang's eyes seemed to be measuring the value of everything in this house. That evening, as he sat beside my mother-in-law, gently pouring water, serving food, and speaking so politely, I couldn't find a single reason to object. But the more I looked at that smile, the more uneasy I felt inside. Because some bad people don't enter a home with shouting or rudeness. They enter with a bouquet of flowers, a sweet voice, and a face so gentle that it makes you forget to be on your guard. After the night Hai Dang appeared in our house with that bouquet of yellow lilies and his polite smile, my mother-in-law stopped listening to any further advice. She told Khan straight out that the wedding would be held within 10 days. It didn't need to be grand, but it had to be formal enough for relatives to know she wasn't living in secret or doing anything wrong. I felt a heavy heart hearing that. A marriage rushed so quickly that the family hadn't even had time to understand who the other person was. Yet, she viewed all our worries as mere interference. Khan tried talking to his mother a few more times. He told her that if she wanted a companion, he wouldn't stop her. But marriage is a lifelong commitment. "Could you give us some time to learn more about Dang, Mom?" Mrs. Wei's eyes immediately turned red. "Why do you need to look into him? To dig up his past and judge him? I'm old enough, I can take responsibility for myself." After saying that, she turned to me, her voice colder. "As for you, too, if you truly want me to be happy, help me arrange a proper wedding. Don't let people say the daughter-in-law doesn't know how to behave." I bit my lip and agreed, not because I consented, but because I understood that if I objected now, she would only think I was selfish, afraid that if she had someone by her side, I would lose my status in the house. So, for the next few days, I juggled work, caring for the baby, ordering the catering, cleaning the house, and calling relatives from the list my mother-in-law gave me. Hai Dang stopped by every day, sometimes bringing fruit, other times buying supplements for her. Sometimes he even helped Khan move tables and chairs. On the surface, he was so thoughtful that it was easy for anyone to soften. The wedding was held right in the courtyard. That morning, Mrs. Wei wore a turquoise ao dye. Her hair was in a low bun, and she wore the pearl necklace she'd kept since her youth. I had to admit she was beautiful, not with the vibrant beauty of youth, but with the elegance of a woman who has lived, knows how to care for herself, and how to stand out. She walked to the center of the courtyard, meeting the curious gazes of our relatives with a pride that seemed to say she felt no shame. The relatives didn't arrive in large numbers, but enough to fill the house with whispers. Some offered genuine congratulations, while others came out of pure curiosity. An aunt pulled me aside and whispered into my ear, though her voice wasn't quiet at all. Your mother-in-law is something else. Marrying a man nearly 30 years her junior and acting like it's nothing. I could only offer a forced smile. Yes, as long as she's happy, that's what matters. She gave a scoffing laugh. Sure, happy is one thing, but this kind of happiness calls for caution. That statement struck a chord with the unease in my heart. I turned to look at Hai Dang. That day, he wore a white shirt and black trousers, his hair slicked back, with a bright face. The classic look of a young man who knows how to charm his elders. He bowed his head to greet everyone he passed. He offered his arm to the elderly and smiled gently at the children. The relatives who had been disparaging at first began to nod in approval after hearing just a few words from him. He's young, but he's very polite. The strange thing was that on the wedding day, hardly anyone from Hai Dang's side was there, except for a man in his 30s who introduced himself as his cousin. The man wore a wrinkled shirt and faded jeans, with a sullen look. He barely sat down before standing up to answer a phone call and heading outside. I took the chance to ask, "Are you a relative from his side? Couldn't his parents make it?" The man gave me a quick glance and replied curtly, "His family is small. Old stories are complicated. Why ask?" His answer only made me more suspicious, but Hai Dang, as if he had predicted it, immediately stepped in with a dismissive laugh. "Please understand, my parents passed away early. My relatives are scattered, and since I'm used to being independent, I didn't want to bother anyone." His voice dropped just enough, and his eyes held just enough sadness to make those standing nearby feel an immediate sense of sympathy. My mother-in-law heard this and quickly grabbed his hand, as if afraid someone would reopen the wounds of the woman in love. The wedding ceremony was simple but still followed all the traditions. As Hai was putting the ring on Mrs. Wei's finger, he stared at her for a long time and said, "From now on, I will take care of you and never let you be lonely again." My mother-in-law's friends clapped enthusiastically, some even wiping away tears, saying that for a woman, finding someone who knows how to cherish her in her twilight years is a blessing. I stood behind them listening to those words, not knowing whether to feel happy or afraid. If he is sincere, it is a blessing. But if he is lying, my mother-in-law's emotional void will turn into a knife that comes back to harm her. While everyone was eating, little Society ran over with a candy to give to Hai Dang. In front of everyone, he leaned down to pat her head, smiling very gently. "Such a good girl, Sok, thank you." But just as little Society turned away, I accidentally saw him flick his hand against the tablecloth, his face flashing a look of annoyance. It was just for a moment, so quick that if you weren't paying attention, you would have missed it. But I saw it, and my heart turned cold. Near the end of the party, while I was clearing some dishes in the living room, I caught Hai Dang standing in front of the wooden cabinet against the wall. That is the cabinet my mother-in-law uses to store her important documents, savings books, insurance policies, and some real estate deeds. He had his phone in his hand, holding it up very quickly as if taking a picture of something. I stepped forward and asked, "Are you looking for something?" He was startled, but in a split second, he regained his natural composure. "Oh no, ma'am. I just thought the cabinet was so beautiful. I was thinking of taking a picture to ask where it was made. When I have my own house later, I want to get one just like it." I looked straight into his eyes. He was still smiling, a gentle smile without a single flaw. But this time, I no longer saw any politeness in it. I only saw a coat of gloss paint carefully applied over something rotten inside. That evening, after the guests left, my mother-in-law announced that from now on, the second-floor room would be the private space for her and her husband. She said, "I'm newlywed, I need some privacy, no one is to come up there unless I call for you." Khan paused for a moment after hearing that, but then still nodded. As for me, I watched Hai carrying a suitcase up the stairs, his other hand resting on my mother-in-law's back as if he had been the master of this house for a long time. I suddenly had a very bad feeling. I didn't know exactly what would happen, but I knew that from that night on, This house would no longer be the same. A stranger had just entered under the title of my mother-in-law's husband, and after only a hasty wedding, he had begun to lay his hands on the most important doors of the family. On the first night after the wedding, the house became quiet very quickly. The laughter, the sound of dishes, and the relatives' well wishes from the afternoon seemed locked behind a heavy gate. I finished cleaning up near midnight, feeling completely exhausted. But as I passed the stairs, I still instinctively looked up at the second floor. My mother-in-law's bedroom door was tightly shut, with a faint yellow light spilling from underneath. I faintly heard her soft laughter, then Hi saying something indistinct. I told myself it was normal for newlyweds to want privacy. Mrs. Wei had been lonely for many years. If she was truly happy today, I shouldn't be too strict. Thinking that, I quietly dimmed the lights downstairs and went to my room. But for some reason, I didn't sleep soundly that night, drifting in and out while hearing what sounded like footsteps above me. The next morning, I woke up early to cook porridge for little society and prepared breakfast as usual. Normally, at that hour, my mother-in-law would have already come downstairs. Sometimes she would water the plants on the porch. Other times she would remind me not to overcook the eggs. But that day, the second floor was silent. I waited until past 8 o'clock, and since she still hadn't come down, I texted, "Mom, what would you like for breakfast so I can prepare it?" Almost 5 minutes later, a reply came. "Leave it in front of the door." The message was only 3 words, blunt and cold. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart sinking slightly, but I reminded myself not to overthink it. I scooped some porridge, made a cup of warm milk, put them on a tray, and carried them up to the second floor. The room door remained closed. I knocked gently, "Mom, I'm leaving your food by the door." There was no response from inside. Only a few seconds later, the door creaked open a tiny bit. A man's hand reached out, pulled the tray in quickly, and slammed it shut. I stood frozen before the door. That hand was definitely Hai Dang's. There would be nothing wrong if he were just helping my mother-in-law. But the way he pulled the tray in so hastily, as if afraid I'd see something inside. When I went downstairs, Khan was tying his shoes, ready for work. I told him what happened. He just sighed. "Mom must still be shy. Just let her be for a few days." I looked at him, wanting to say more, but then stopped myself. Because from the very beginning, he didn't want to believe anything was wrong. On the second day, the situation remained the same. My mother-in-law didn't come down, didn't ask about baby society, and didn't step onto the balcony to sunbathe as she usually did. All contact was made only through text messages. At mealtime, I brought the food up and left it at the door. This time, no one opened it right away. A long while later, there was the sound of slippers shuffling on the floor. Then Hai Dang opened the door to take the tray. I tried to look inside, but he blocked the view, smiling faintly. "You're working too hard, too. Mom is tired. Please don't keep calling out and bothering her." I replied calmly, "If Mom is sick, let me take her to the doctor." Hai Dang shook his head immediately. "No need, sister. Older people who just remarried can have mood swings. I can handle it." The words "I can handle it" sounded polite, but felt like a reminder that I had no right to enter that room anymore. By the third day, I started paying closer attention. The lunch tray I brought up was almost untouched when I got it back. Only the glass of water was drained. The same went for the evening. The soup my mother-in-law usually loved wasn't touched, but the mineral water and the vitamins were going down fast. I texted her, "Mom, you're eating so little. Are you in any pain?" A reply came almost immediately. "No need, don't bother me." I looked at the message, feeling it was strange. My mother-in-law usually writes very long messages, likes using exclamation marks, and sometimes even sends whole paragraphs of instructions. But for the past few days, the messages have been short, cold, and monotonous, as if someone else were holding the phone. I showed the phone to Khan when he got home. He read it, his face tensing slightly, but he still said, "Maybe Mom wants to keep some distance because she's afraid we'll judge her marriage. Don't make things any more tense." I didn't argue, but a very specific worry began to take root in my heart. It wasn't just a feeling of dislike for Hai Dang, nor was it a prejudice against my mother-in-law marrying a younger man. It was the feeling that someone in the house was being gradually separated from the rest of us, piece by piece, very silently. On Wednesday night, around midnight, I went down to the kitchen for water and saw a shadow glide through the living room. Hai Dang was coming down the stairs, wearing a loose t-shirt, his hair messy, holding my mother-in-law's phone in his hand. He opened the fridge, grabbed 2 cans of energy drink, and turned around. Seeing me, he hesitated for a moment but immediately smiled. "Still awake, too?" I looked at his wrist and saw a fresh, red scratch. What happened to your hand? He pulled his sleeve down very quickly. Oh, I just bumped into the edge of the table. I asked further, where's Mom? Why didn't she come down to get water herself? Dang looked at me for a few seconds, his smile fading. She's resting, don't worry so much. Or are you afraid I can't take care of her as well as you can? I could clearly hear the provocation in his voice. I replied that I was only asking because she is my mother-in-law. He chuckled softly, she's my wife now too. That sentence choked me, not because he was wrong about the title, but because the way he emphasized, my wife, sounded so grating. It was like a declaration of ownership. He went upstairs, leaving me standing in the dimly lit living room, holding the glass of water while my heart turned cold. On Thursday, little Society suddenly pulled my hand while I was folding clothes. The little girl whispered very softly, Mom, I heard Grandma crying last night. I froze. Where did you hear that? Society pointed upstairs. When I went to the bathroom, I heard Grandma say, please don't. Then Uncle Dang told her to shut up or he'd come back there. I hugged my child tightly, trying to keep my voice calm. Did you see anything? She shook her head, her eyes welling up. I was scared, so I ran back to my room. That evening, I told Khan about it. This time, he couldn't remain as calm as before. He stood up to go upstairs, but stopped after a few steps. If Mom is really just arguing with Dang, we'll look intrusive if we barge in. I looked at my husband. For the first time, his hesitation made me angry. Khan, our 5-year-old child knows to be afraid. You are her son, and yet you're standing there worrying about being intrusive? He lowered his head and didn't answer. On the 6th day, Han, an old friend, stopped by to drop off some work documents, and seeing me looking unwell, she kept asking until I briefly told her about my mother-in-law's rushed wedding, the prenuptial agreement, 8 days barely leaving the room, and other strange signs. Han listened, her expression turning serious immediately. She said, this is not simple at all. There are people who don't take assets right away. They isolate the victim first, then force them to sign investment papers, loan agreements, or powers of attorney. By the time the family finds out, everything has become voluntary in black and white. That statement hit me like a bucket of cold water. That evening, while taking out the trash, I discovered several torn pieces of paper in the kitchen bin. I don't know why, but I bent down to pick them up. As I pieced them together, I read fragmented phrases. Commitment to a company investment, 3 billion profit. Voluntarily providing capital, my hands started to shake. Only then did I realize that those days spent behind closed doors were likely not just the private affairs of newlyweds. Perhaps behind that door, my mother-in-law was being led step by step into a carefully prepared trap. And the scariest part is that on paper, everything will be labeled as voluntary. The 8th night after the wedding, the house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. I lay next to little Society, but I couldn't sleep. Ever since I found those paper scraps in the trash, my head has been spinning with words like investment commitment and voluntary capital support. The more I think about it, the colder I feel. If what Ms. Han said is true, once my mother-in-law signs that paper, nothing will look forced anymore. On paper, it will look like she gave the money voluntarily. Around 1 a.m., just as I had managed to doze off, a loud crash suddenly echoed from the 2nd floor. The sound didn't resemble that of an object falling normally. It was heavy and dull, like a chair being kicked over or someone falling against a wall. I jumped up immediately. Little Society startled and stirred in his sleep, but luckily, he didn't fully wake up. I sat still for a few seconds to listen. The whole house sank back into silence. I was just about to reassure myself that it was probably just the wind slamming a door somewhere when a very faint sound drifted down from above. It was so faint that if I hadn't been straining to listen, I might have missed it. It was my mother-in-law's voice. Her voice was hoarse and weak, as if choked off in her throat. Help me. I felt a chill run through my entire body. There was no doubt left. That was definitely Ms. Wei's voice. I lunged over to shake Khan awake. He was fast asleep and frowned as I woke him, ready to ask what was wrong, but before he could speak, the sound of shuffling came from upstairs again. Then, a man's voice growled very softly. Khan was instantly wide awake. He looked at me, his face deathly pale. I only said one thing. Are you still going to tell me I'm overthinking it this time? Khan bolted up, not even grabbing a shirt, and ran straight out of the room. I told little Society to stay put, locked the door, and ran after him. Reaching the 2nd floor, my mother-in-law's bedroom door was shut tight. Khan banged on it hard. Mom, open the door for me. No one answered, So he banged again, his voice now trembling. "Mom, are you in there?" A moment later, Hai Dang's voice rang out from inside. No longer as soft as before, it was sharp and suppressed with anger. "What are you two doing? What's the meaning of banging on our bedroom door in the middle of the night?" Quote, Khan gritted his teeth and pushed the door. "I just heard my mother crying for help." Hai Dang scoffed, "Your mother was just dreaming. My wife and I were just having a private argument. Don't be so intrusive." Quote, I stepped up next to Khan, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible even though my heart was pounding like a drum. "If nothing is wrong, then open the door so we can take a look at Mom. Once we see her, we'll leave right away." There was silence inside for a few seconds. Then he replied, "Mom is changing her clothes." Inconvenient, that excuse was far too clumsy. In the middle of the night, after a cry for help, he was still using inconvenient to block us. Right at that moment, my mother-in-law's voice rang out from inside again. This time it was clearer, more choked. "Khan, save Mom." Just those 3 words, but enough to make Dewey Khan go insane. He backed up and rammed his shoulder hard against the door. It shook but didn't budge. He hit it again, and the sound of furniture dragging came from inside, proving it had been barricaded. I immediately ran to the kitchen and grabbed the small hammer hanging by the back door. As I ran, I called Uncle Tu, our next-door neighbor. He is an older man who has lived near us for a long time and is easily startled. I spoke quickly, "Uncle, there's an emergency. My mother-in-law is calling for help. We have to break the door down. Please come over to witness it." Quote, I didn't do this to cause a scene, but in such sensitive situations, without an outside witness, Hai Dang could easily claim we broke into his room. When I returned, Khan's eyes were bloodshot, and he was calling for his mother incessantly. Hai Dang inside started cursing, "Are you people crazy? I'm calling the police right now." I raised the hammer and shouted through the door, "Go ahead and call them." I was just about to call them myself. "But if anything happens to my mother before they arrive, you will be held responsible." As soon as I finished, Khan grabbed the hammer from my hand and struck the lock hard. 1 strike, 2, then 3. The lock popped open, but the door wouldn't budge because it was barricaded from the inside. Khan gritted his teeth and kicked with all his might. The chair and suitcase behind the door screeched across the floor with a piercing sound. The door finally flew open. The scene before my eyes left me frozen in shock. My mother-in-law sat on the floor, her hair disheveled, her coat disarranged, and one side of her cheek was swollen and red. Her mouth was half taped shut. The tape had shifted, likely from her struggling. Her wrists were marked with deep red welts, bound by the very silk scarf she once loved so much. When she saw Khan, tears welled up and her whole body began to tremble violently. As for Hai Dang, he was kneeling beside the wide-open safe. Scattered on the floor were savings books, insurance papers, bundles of property documents, and my mother-in-law's ID. On the small bedside table sat a glass of pale yellow liquid. Next to it was a pack of sleeping pills with several tablets missing. The laptop was open, its screen glowing with a cold blue light. What made my blood run cold was that there was an active video call on the screen. A strange woman with short hair and heavy makeup was watching us through the camera with a panicked look. Hai Dang reacted instantly. He jumped up and raised his hands as if he were innocent. "You two misunderstood. Mom was agitated and tried to hurt herself, so I had to restrain her. I was afraid she would be embarrassed, so I didn't dare call anyone." Khan rushed over to help his mother. His hands were shaking so much he couldn't untie the knot. I knelt down to help him untie her, glaring at Hai Dang the whole time. Restraining her meant taping her mouth shut, and the safe was wide open? "Do you think we are children?" Hai Dang was about to speak again when my mother-in-law suddenly grabbed my hand. Her hand was icy cold, and her nails dug into my skin, causing a sharp pain. She struggled to force each word out with great difficulty. He tricked me, he forced me to sign, he already has a wife." That last sentence struck the room like a blade falling from above. I whipped my head around to look at Hai Dang. His face paled for a second, but he still tried to force a smile. "Mom is just panicked and talking nonsense." Just then, my eyes landed on the ring on his finger. During the struggle, the ring shifted slightly, revealing a tiny name engraved on the inside. My Lan, not Bitch Wei, and certainly not my mother-in-law's wedding date. I walked over to the table and picked up the papers next to the laptop. It was a pre-drafted contract. It stated that Ms. Bitch Wei voluntarily invested 2 billion Vietnamese dongs into Hai Dang's project, with a double indemnity clause if she withdrew. The signature line was blank, and a red ink pad for a thumbprint had already been placed beside it. Our neighbor, Mr. 2, just ran to the doorway, turned pale at the sight, and I immediately took out my phone, started recording the entire scene, and called the police. This time, I didn't hesitate anymore. While I was dialing, the woman on the laptop screen suddenly blurted out, "Dang, turn it off. If you haven't gotten the signature yet, pull out for now." The whole room went dead silent. Hai was staring at the screen, his face drained of all color. And in that very moment, I understood that this nightmare wasn't caused by him alone. Behind the young man who went by the name of my mother-in-law's new husband, there was someone else. It might even be an entire ring that had planned everything before he ever set foot in this house. I called the police, my hands still shaking, not from fear of Dang, but because the scene before me was so horrifying. A woman in her 50s, who had lived her whole life fueled by dignity and pride, now sat slumped on the floor, her hair disheveled, her wrists bright red, her eyes panicked as if she had just woken up from a nightmare. If we had been even a moment later, I truly dare not think of what would have happened. Seeing me make the call, Hai Dang lunged to grab the phone, but Khan stood in front of me, one hand supporting his mother and the other pushing him back hard. He growled, "Take one more step, and I won't need to wait for the police." This was the first time I had ever heard Khan speak to someone in such a fierce tone. The man who used to tell me to be patient, who was always afraid of upsetting his mother, now had bloodshot eyes as if he wanted to devour the person who had laid a hand on her. Mr. 2, the neighbor standing at the door, witnessed the whole thing. He said shakily, "Dang, you're still young. If there's something going on, you should explain it clearly." No one looking at this scene could possibly call it a normal marital dispute. Hearing this, Hai Dang changed his expression instantly, lowered his voice, his eyes welling up as he turned to my mother-in-law. "Wei, tell them, wasn't I just trying to stop you from doing something foolish? Didn't you sign the investment contract of your own free will? Tell them, I truly love you." If this were a few days ago, perhaps my mother-in-law would have softened at that tone of voice. But right now, she just cowered, shaking her head repeatedly. The tape I had just removed left the corners of her mouth red and sore. She struggled to catch her breath, voice broken. "Get out of my house." That single sentence was enough to make Hai Dang's face darken instantly. Not long after, the ward police arrived, and the room was immediately secured as a crime scene. I showed the officer the video I had just recorded, while pointing out the glass of water, the pills, the contract, the ink pad, the open safe, and the video call saved on the laptop. The woman on the screen had vanished, but I managed to record her saying, "If you can't get it signed, just pull out first." Upon hearing that, the officer's expression became stern. Hai Dang still tried to argue, saying, "My mother-in-law is mentally unstable. She was agitated after the wedding due to her children's opposition, and I was just trying to restrain her." He even shamelessly added, "They never liked me. Ever since I stepped into this house, 2 has nitpicked everything about me. Now they're taking this opportunity to frame me just to kick me out." Hearing that, I just looked at him and gave a cold laugh. This type of person truly doesn't shed tears until they see the coffin. Even at this point, he still wants to play the victim. I spoke very clearly. If you were only restraining my mother because you feared she would do something foolish, why was the safe open? Why were the land deeds lying on the floor? Why was there a 2 billion dong capital contribution contract and an ink pad ready? And why did you barricade the door with a chair and a suitcase when we heard her calling for help? Hai Dang was speechless for a few seconds before turning to Mrs. Wei. "Say something. You once said you wanted to invest with me. You once said you wanted to make money with me so the two of us could live on our own." Mrs. Wei burst into tears upon hearing the words, "the two of us." But this time, it was not the cry of someone weak. It was the cry of someone ashamed, hateful, and pained from realizing how deeply she had been deceived. She grabbed Khan's hand and said tremblingly, "Mom was wrong. Mom was truly wrong, my child." The police confiscated Hai Dang's phone, laptop, documents, and even a ring with the name My Lan engraved on the inside. While conducting a preliminary check of the computer, one officer suddenly called the other over to take a look. I was standing not far away, so I heard a few disjointed sentences. It wasn't just one person, there were many folders, with names, photos, contracts. My heart sank. My worst hunch was right. Inside Hai Dang's computer, there were many folders named after women. Some were named Hong Van, some Tan Ha, some Cam Tu. Each folder contained photos of documents, romantic messages, asset information, and nearly identical contract templates. The officer looked at Khan and said slowly, "The family should prepare themselves mentally. This might not be an isolated act. There are signs of an organized scam group." Quote. Khan collapsed onto the edge of the bed. Mrs. Wei seemed to lose all her strength, leaning on her son's shoulder and gasping for air. I poured her a cup of warm water and helped her take small sips. Even though I still carried much hurt from the years she treated me harshly, seeing her then, I couldn't be cold. Those who commit wrong must be held responsible, but those in a panic also need to be pulled back before they fall into the abyss. When things settled down, an officer asked Mrs. Wei, "How did you meet this man? Who introduced him?" As soon as that question was asked, I saw her whole body stiffen. She bowed her head, her hands clenching tightly together. Khan also looked at his mother, his voice hoarse, "Mom, at this point, what else are you hiding?" Mrs. Wei did not answer immediately. Her silence made the already suffocating room feel even heavier. I looked at her and suddenly realized the fear in her eyes wasn't just fear of Hai Dang. She was afraid of something else, something that perhaps made her even more ashamed than being scammed. After the police took Hai Dang in for questioning and sealed some of the equipment, the house returned to silence. But it was no longer a normal silence. It was like the calm after a storm, when the roof is still there, but everything inside has been devastated. Mrs. Wei sat on the living room sofa, a thin shawl draped over her shoulders, her eyes staring into nothingness. Khan sat beside his mother, while I stood by the table, unsure of what to say first. After a long while, she was the one who spoke, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. "Khan, there is something I haven't been honest about with you both." Khan immediately looked up. I stared at her as well. She choked back a sob, and tears spilled out again. "I didn't meet Hai Dang at the community center class like I told you." I felt a chill run down my spine. She continued slowly, each word sounding like it was being pried from the shame in her heart. "At first, I was the one who paid him to approach me." My mother-in-law's confession made the entire living room seem to freeze. Khan looked at his mother, his lips moving, but no words came out. I stood there, my hand still resting on the back of the chair, feeling as if a massive piece of truth had just crashed before me. From the start, I had assumed my mother-in-law was the one being pursued by Hai Dang, blinded by his sweet words. I never expected the beginning of it all to be a wrong decision she had walked into herself. Khan asked in a hoarse voice, "What did you say? What do you mean you paid him?" Mrs. Wei bowed her head low, her shoulders slumped. The woman who once terrified me with a single glance now sat huddled on the chair like a child who had broken a precious vase. She spoke through her sobs. "At first, I didn't think things would end up like this. I only wanted someone to talk to." She shared that nearly a year ago, after a sickness left her hospitalized for several days, she realized she was lonelier than she thought. Khan was busy with work, I was busy with the children, and relatives only called on holidays. During those evenings in her room, hearing our family laughing and talking downstairs, she felt both happy and sorrowful. She didn't want to admit she needed someone because she had spent her whole life being strong, but the more she braced herself, the emptier she felt. Then, one day while browsing her phone, she joined a group for middle-aged women. At first, it was just a place to share health tips, beauty advice, and confide about their twilight years. In that group, many people talked about high-end companions, a type of service where someone talks to you, goes out to eat, takes a walk, and listens to your thoughts. They advertised very cleverly, not vulgarly or overtly, just helping lonely women feel cared for in a civilized way. Mrs. Wei covered her face as she said this. "I know it sounds shameful to hear, but back then I only thought about hiring someone to talk to for a few sessions. I didn't want to bother my children and grandchildren, nor did I want anyone to know I was lonely." My heart grew heavy as I listened. She was indeed wrong, but within that mistake was a very real sadness of the elderly, something that children and grandchildren often fail to see. The first person to message her wasn't Hai Dang, but a woman's account named Mai Lan. That person spoke very gently, claiming to be a widow who understood the feeling of having no one to check in on you at night. Mai Lan sent her profiles of a few companions, among whom Hai Dang was the youngest. Mrs. Wei was initially hesitant, but Mai Lan kept saying, "You are still beautiful and have the right to be loved. A woman suffers her whole life. In old age, you must live for yourself." Quote. Those words struck right at her pride and her desire to be acknowledged. The first meeting with Dang took place at a quiet coffee shop. He arrived early, stood up to pull out her chair, and called her, "You, Kai," instead of "ma'am" or "aunt." Just that one word made her feel young again. He complimented her sad eyes, her elegant way of speaking, and the beauty of her hands. Those seemingly small things made her believe she was still attractive and still being looked at through a man's eyes. At first, it was all just paid meetings. Every time they went for a meal or coffee, she would transfer a sum to Dang as a time fee. Later on, he began initiating messages more often. Not just during the agreed hours, he would ask if she had taken her medicine. He reminded her to wear warm clothes and sent her old songs she liked. Gradually, the line between business and affection became blurred. Mrs. Wei began to believe that he truly cared about her. Khan heard that and clutched his head, his voice pained. "Mom, are you so emotionally starved that you have to hire some kid to love you?" That remark made Bao Wei burst into tears. I saw her shrink back, so even though I didn't want to defend her mistakes, I whispered to my husband, "Stay calm, we need to hear the rest first." Khan looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, but eventually, he remained silent. She said that after about 2 months, Dang started saying he didn't want to receive payment by the session anymore, because it made him feel cheapened. He said, "I don't want you to see me as someone being hired. I want to be with you for real." That very sentence touched her heart. Then he proposed setting up a long-term contract, a sort of private marriage agreement, to keep things clear and avoid trouble for both sides. On paper, he pledged not to dispute her private assets. In return, she would support him with a monthly allowance, as if building a new life together. What made her give in was his saying, "I am truly poor, but I don't sell my feelings. I just don't want outsiders to say I'm leeching off you." It sounded self-respecting at the time, but thinking back, it was a trap wrapped in beautiful words. After she signed the private contract, Dang changed very cleverly. He didn't ask for money immediately but instead talked about an investment project in need of capital. He said he had an acquaintance in the healthcare field who wanted to open a chain of therapy centers for middle-aged people, which fit her image perfectly. He painted a vision where she could be loved and also become a financially independent woman, not needing to rely on her son. Mrs. Wei admitted that in 6 months, she had transferred over 1 billion Vietnamese dongs to him, some marked as capital, some as project support, and some simply as personal transfers. Every time she hesitated, Dang would sulk and say, "If you don't trust me, then forget it. I thought we were husband and wife." Quote, and so, her heart would soften again. Hearing this, images flashed through my mind: the wooden cabinet, the safe, the torn papers, and the look in Dang's eyes when he entered the house. It all clicked into place. He didn't just cheat her out of love, he cheated her out of her self-respect, her loneliness, and my mother-in-law's deepest fears. Mrs. Wei looked at me, her voice dropping. I know you despise me." I was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "I don't look down on you, Mom, but I'm angry. Angry because you didn't trust your own family, but chose to trust a stranger just because they said what you wanted to hear." She bowed her head, tears falling onto her wrinkled hands. No one could sleep that night. Khan sat on the porch until nearly dawn. My mother-in-law sat in the living room, occasionally letting out a soft sob. As for me, I gathered all the papers, messages, and transfer histories she had provided, and tucked them into a file folder. I understood that from this moment on, my family wasn't just dealing with a failed marriage. We were facing a trap built with money, affection, and the voids in a person's heart. The next morning, at the crack of dawn, our house still felt as heavy as if it had just hosted a funeral. Khan took the day off work. Sitting beside his mother in the living room, Mrs. Wei said almost nothing, only clutching a hot cup of tea, her eyes red and swollen from crying all night. I sat opposite her, opening every paper, every message, and every transfer history she had handed over. I tried to organize everything chronologically to be ready to work with the authorities. Around 9 o'clock, the doorbell suddenly rang. I started and looked out through the camera. At the gate stood a woman in her 50s, wearing dark clothes, hair in a low bun, with a haggard face like someone who hadn't slept for days. She stood tucked under the eaves, hugging a thick file folder to her chest. I have never seen her before. Khan frowned and asked, "Who is it?" I shook my head but still carefully cracked the door open without unlatching the safety chain. The woman looked at me, her voice trembling. "May I ask, is this Mrs. Bitch Way's house? I asked again, who are you? She swallowed hard and glanced into the house as if afraid of being overheard. My name is Hong Van. I'm here because of the man named Hai Dang. Upon hearing the name Hai Dang, my mother-in-law, who had been sitting on the couch, immediately looked up, the teacup in her hand clinking against the saucer. I opened the door for Ms. Hong Van, but kept my distance. After what just happened, I no longer dare to trust any stranger who approaches me too easily. As soon as Mrs. Hong Van saw the photo of Hai Dang on the file placed on the table, she rushed over, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She pointed at the photo, her voice choking, "It's him, this very guy, but he didn't use the name Hai Dang before. He told me his name was Min Quan," my mother-in-law said, falling silent. Khan jumped up, and I felt my scalp go numb. It turns out that the name Hai Dang might just be a shell. Mrs. Hong Van sat down, taking out a stack of old papers from her bag, the edges wrinkled from being handled repeatedly. She recounted that 2 years ago, she was also a widow with some assets left by her husband, and her children had their own families and were rarely around. While participating in a group for middle-aged women, she was introduced by an online friend to a young man, described as understanding, affectionate, and not greedy for money. That person was Hai Dang, but back then he used the name Min Quan. At first, he just sent messages to check on her, then took her to doctor visits, bought medicine, and remembered every dish she liked. She laughed bitterly as she said this. He wasn't good because he was handsome. He was good because he knew what women at this age lacked most. Not money, but a timely word of concern. I looked over at my mother-in-law. Her face was deathly pale. Perhaps every word from Mrs. Hong Van was like a reflection of the days she herself was being led by the nose. Mrs. Hong Van continued, saying that after a few months, he also said he wanted to give her a proper status. He also suggested a small wedding, offered a private contract, and swore he didn't care about her assets. When she trusted him, he began to encourage her to invest in a healthcare project for the elderly. The project name was different, the person behind it was different, but the method was almost identical. Mrs. Hong Van transferred him nearly 3 billion Vietnamese dongs, part of it being her savings, and part from a mortgage loan on her small house. When she became suspicious and demanded her capital back, he turned on her, threatening to release private images he had secretly filmed while they lived together. She was afraid her children and grandchildren would find out, and she feared being mocked by neighbors, so she didn't dare report it to the police immediately. By the time she gathered the courage to report it, he had already disappeared. Khan gritted his teeth. "Why didn't you push it to the end back then?" Mrs. Hong Van looked at him, her eyes reddened. "You are still young, you wouldn't understand. For a woman my age, sometimes losing money isn't as scary as having people point fingers, gossiping that I was chasing after a younger man. I once thought it was better to swallow the humiliation alone than to let my children be ashamed of their mother." That statement left the whole room in silence. I cannot blame her. My own mother-in-law nearly chose to remain silent for the same reason. Pride, when placed in the wrong context, can become a noose around one's neck. Mrs. Wei suddenly asked with a trembling voice, "Do you know who is behind him?" Mrs. Hong Van looked at her for a long time and replied, "I used to think he acted alone, but after hearing he was detained, I dared to come here, because I saw a name in my old records that appeared next to his." Saying that, she took out a photo printed from a cafe's security camera. In the photo, Hai is sitting across from a middle-aged woman, who looks elegant, with short hair and wearing sunglasses. As soon as my mother-in-law saw the photo, she staggered, having to grab the armrest to stay seated. She muttered, "Impossible." I leaned down to look closer, but since the photo was a bit blurry, I couldn't recognize who that person was. Mrs. Hong Van continued, "She didn't show her face often, but every time I was about to transfer money, she appeared nearby. I suspect she is the coordinator." Quote. Khan asked, "Do you know her name?" Mrs. Hong Van shook her head. I only heard Hai calling her Sister Lan. As soon as the words Sister Lan were spoken, my mother-in-law looked as if she had been struck hard in the chest. She covered her mouth with her hand, and tears immediately welled up. I turned to ask, "Mom, do you know this person?" Mrs. Wei did not answer, only stared at the photo, her whole body trembling. A moment later, she spoke like someone who had lost her soul. "If it truly is her, then Mom wasn't scammed because I was foolish. Mom was pushed into a trap by the very person she trusted most." Before I could ask anything more, Mrs. Hong Van gripped the file tightly, her voice suddenly hardening. "Mrs. Wei, I didn't come here to pick at your wounds. I came because I don't want any more women to have to carry this shame like I did. If you dare to step forward, I will stand by your side." Mrs. Wei looked up at the woman sitting across from her, two women in their 50s. One who had just escaped the trap, and one who had once hit rock bottom in that same trap, looked at each other with shame, pain, and a bit of belated courage. Sitting beside them, I suddenly realized this story went far beyond a mother-in-law marrying the wrong young man. Behind Hai Dang was a network that knew exactly how to prey on the loneliness, pride, and longing for love of middle-aged women. And if we stopped at just saving my mother-in-law, many more people would continue to fall prey to them. Before leaving, Mrs. Hong Van left the entire file behind. She said, "I used to stay silent out of shame, but silence only helps them thrive." That statement made my mother-in-law bow her head for a long time. It was then that I realized the real shock wasn't that Hai Dang had deceived her, but that he had used the same script to scam so many others. And it was very possible that the person behind him was a familiar face who often entered my house with a friendly smile. After Mrs. Hong Van left, our house fell into a strange silence. No one said a word to each other, but everyone had the same question in their mind. Who exactly is this woman called Sister Lan? My mother-in-law sat motionless in her chair, her eyes still fixed on the open photo Mrs. Hong Van had left behind. Even though the face in the photo wasn't clear, showing only the figure, short hair, and a silk scarf, Mrs. Wei's reaction told me she had recognized something. Khan stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Mom, who is the person in the photo?" Mrs. Wei's lips moved, but she could not find the words to speak. I poured her another glass of warm water, placed it in front of her, and said gently, "Mom, things have reached this point. Hiding it only makes it more dangerous. If that person really knows you, we must clarify it to deal with the situation." Mrs. Wei closed her eyes, and tears fell very slowly. After a moment, she finally said, "My Lan," and at those two words, Khan froze instantly. I was also stunned. Mrs. My Lan was not a stranger. She had been my mother-in-law's close friend for over 10 years, someone who often came over for tea, dinner, and even held little society when she was just born. In our eyes, she was a lively, well-spoken woman who always acted as caring toward my mother-in-law as a sister. I remember clearly that it was My Lan who often told my mother-in-law, "Sister Wei, you are still young and beautiful, don't live like a shadow in your son's house. We women have suffered half our lives, in our old age, we must learn to cherish ourselves." At that time, I only thought it was words of encouragement from a friend. Looking back now, every word was like a tiny needle, slowly pricking at Bao Wei's loneliness and pride. Khan couldn't believe it, he shook his head repeatedly, "Impossible. Aunt Lan comes to our house all the time, she even calls me, Little Khan, and buys gifts for society." Mrs. Wei gave a twisted smile, the sound of which hurt more than crying. "I also used to think so. I treated her like a sister, I told her everything that happened. I even told her how sad and lonely I felt, that I felt I was getting old, and that I felt like an outsider as my children had their own lives." Hearing that, my heart suddenly felt heavy. It turned out the things my mother-in-law didn't tell us, she told an outsider instead, and that very person used that trust to open the door for Hai Dang to enter her life. That afternoon, Khan brought all the files, photos, and related information to the authorities to provide additional testimony. I stayed home with my mother-in-law. She sat on the sofa, picking up and putting down her phone every few moments. I knew she wanted to call My Lan, wanted to ask why, but was afraid to hear the answer. Toward evening, her phone suddenly vibrated, and the screen displayed the name, Lan Best Friend. Mrs. Wei looked at me, I nodded slightly, turned on the recorder on my phone, and placed it nearby. Her hands trembled as she answered the call. My Lan's voice was as sweet as ever. Quote, "Wei, I heard something happened at your place. Are you okay? I've been so worried, but I didn't dare come over, afraid of intruding. If you didn't know the truth, anyone listening would think she was a dear friend genuinely concerned." Mrs. Wei took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. Quote, "Lan, let me ask you honestly, did you know Hai Dang beforehand?" There was a very brief silence on the other end. Very brief, but enough for me to catch her unease. Then, My Lan laughed. Quote, "Goodness, what kind of strange thing are you saying? I only introduced you to that social group. How could I possibly know everyone you met there?" Mrs. Wei gripped the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. "Then who is the person in the photo with him at the cafe?" This time, the silence lasted longer. My Lan's voice turned cold, no longer sweet. Quote, "Who have you been listening to? You're just panicking and suspecting everything. How many years have we known each other? You don't trust me, but you trust outsiders?" I looked at my mother-in-law. Her face was pale, but her eyes were no longer clouded as before. She said slowly, "I used to think of you as family, but family doesn't push me into the hands of a con artist." A scoff immediately came from the other side. Just one, and my land's mask of kindness seemed to fall away. She said, "Way, that's so ungrateful. You chose the young man, you sent the money, you married him yourself. Now that you've lost face, you're turning around and blaming me?" My mother-in-law trembled. I feared she couldn't take it and reached for the phone, but she shook her head. She asked in a choked voice, "Why? What did I ever do to wrong you?" That question was both painful and real. The other end was silent for a few seconds, then my land said, every word venomous, "You did nothing. It's precisely because you were always better than me that I hated you. You have a home, a successful son, a daughter-in-law who cares for you, and grandchildren who adore you. And what about me? Abandoned by my husband, alienated from my children, and drowning in debt, living in luxury, yet you keep complaining about being lonely to me. Do you know how annoying that is to hear?" I felt a chill down my spine. It turns out that behind those words of comfort was years of accumulated jealousy. My land didn't just want money. She wanted to see my mother-in-law lose her dignity, her fortune, her trust, and bow her head in shame. Mrs. Way burst into tears. "I treated you like my own sister." My land gave a cold laugh. "Own sister? Every time we went out, everyone praised you for being more elegant, younger, and luckier than me. Did you ever notice me standing beside you like a shadow?" At that point, she lowered her voice, dripping with threats. "Mrs. Way, I advise you to stay quiet. If you make a scene, then the clips and contracts. Your messages aren't exactly clean either. The world doesn't care if you were tricked or not. They only care that you're a fool who fell for a young man." I immediately signaled my mother-in-law to keep the call going. Mrs. Way trembled but still asked, "Then what do you want?" My land replied quickly, "Withdraw the complaint. Tell the police it was a misunderstanding between spouses, and consider the transferred money a tuition fee. If you're smart, I'll have everyone delete all the unpleasant things." That was the evidence we needed. I pressed stop on the recording and saved it immediately. My mother-in-law understood as well. She looked at me, tears still falling, but her expression had changed. It was no longer the look of someone consumed by fear, but of someone pushed to the edge and starting to stand up for herself. When Khan returned, I played the recording for him to hear. He sat stunned for a long time before slamming his fist on the table. Quote, "I called her aunt for all these years, yet she harmed my mother to this extent." My mother-in-law didn't say a word, she just bowed her head, but this time, she didn't cry out loud anymore. That very night, we submitted the additional recording, along with photos and information related to my land. The authorities also stated that several transactions in the ledger flowed into the account of a middle-aged woman with a full name matching my land's. Upon hearing that news, I saw my mother-in-law close her eyes, her hands over her chest as if confirming the most painful truth. By now, the entire picture has become much clearer. Dang was the bait, the contracts were the net, and my land was the one behind it all, choosing her targets and preying on every woman's loneliness, pride, and weaknesses. The scariest part isn't that she was a stranger, but that she was so familiar. She knew my mother-in-law feared aging, abandonment, and humiliation, and she used those very fears to lead her step by step into the abyss. After my land's recording was submitted as evidence, I thought things would start to become clearer. At the very least, my mother-in-law could breathe a sigh of relief knowing who was behind it all. But I was wrong. Some truths, once brought to light, don't bring relief but instead crush the last bit of strength one has left. Since that day, Mrs. Way has barely stepped out of the living room. She sits silently for hours, sometimes staring at the yard, sometimes at her powered-off phone. The woman who used to correct anyone the moment they said a single wrong word. Now, I even have to remind her to pick up her chopsticks at mealtime. Once, little Society ran over and asked, "Grandma, is your hand still hurting?" She looked at the marks on her wrist and burst into tears, scaring the little girl so much she ran to hide in my arms. Relatives somehow caught wind of the rumors and started calling to check in. They claimed to be concerned, but their voices were full of curiosity. One person said, "Mrs. Way, is it true you were scammed by a young man? You're old enough, why did you believe such sweet talk?" Some even feigned sympathy, saying money can be earned back, but a reputation is hard to restore. Every phone call is like a slap in the face to her. At first, she would answer, but later, she'd just hand the phone to Khan with trembling hands whenever a strange number called. Watching that, I felt both angry and sympathetic. I was angry because her own pride had dragged the whole family into this mess, but I also felt for her, as it is devastating for an elderly person to have their honor attacked so directly. The pain isn't just about money, it's the feeling of being betrayed by oneself, mocked by the world, and exposed by one's own family as having a weakness they spent a lifetime trying to hide. Khan has changed completely. He is no longer as calm as before, and he no longer asks me to be understanding of his mother. He has become hot-tempered and irritable, especially when the phone rings. One day, he threw a glass onto the table and choked out, "Why didn't you tell me, Mom? Why did you trust a stranger more than your own son?" Hearing this, Mrs. Wei just lowered her head, her hands tightly twisted together. I had to pull Khan out to the porch and whisper, "You're hurting, and Mom is hurting too." Blaming her more now will only break her completely. By the third day, after my land was placed under investigation, Mrs. Wei refused to eat. I cooked chicken porridge and brought it straight to her room. She just shook her head, "I can't swallow anything." I placed the bowl of porridge on the table. I didn't force her, just said that even if she couldn't swallow, she had to eat a few spoonfuls. Quote, "You still have to work with the police, recover your documents, and face my land. If you collapse now, they are the ones who will be happiest." She looked at me for a long time, her lips trembling. "Do you still want me to get back on my feet? I have treated you so poorly." I was silent for a moment and replied, "I haven't forgotten the past, but the past can wait. Right now, you are the victim, and a victim must stay clear-headed enough to demand justice." She lowered her face, and tears fell onto the back of her hand. For the first time, she didn't argue, didn't put up a front, and didn't use an arrogant tone to hide her weakness. I thought she had begun to calm down, but unexpectedly, another incident happened that evening. It was pouring rain, and the wind whistled through the door cracks, knocking over the potted plants on the porch. After I put little society to bed and went downstairs, I saw Mrs. Wei's door ajar. The light was on, but there was no one in bed. At first, I thought she had gone to the kitchen for some water. I went around the house and called out softly, "Mom." No one answered. I went upstairs and then out to the backyard, my heart starting to race. The slippers she usually wore were also no longer by the door. A sense of unease hit me, sending a chill from the back of my neck down my spine. I ran in to call Khan. As soon as he heard his mother was missing, he jumped up, his face deathly pale. We searched the whole house. The wardrobe was untouched, her phone was on the table, but her thin brown coat was gone. On the tea table lay a folded piece of paper tucked under the jade bracelet she wore every day. Khan picked it up, his hands shaking so much that the paper crinkled. I stood beside him, watching her slanted handwriting, my throat tightening. "Khan, too, I'm sorry, I can't bear to face you anymore. I was wrong. I thought I was still sharp and wise, but it turns out I'm just a lonely old woman who was being played. If I stay, people will laugh at you and little society too. I'm leaving for a while to find peace, don't look for me." When Khan read that, he almost collapsed. He crumpled the paper in his hand and rushed out into the rain like a madman. I ran after him, shouting, "Khan, calm down, let's split up to search, but we need to call for help." I called Uncle Tu, Aunt Han, and even Mrs. Hong Van to ask where my mother-in-law might have gone in such a state. With every passing call, my heart burned with anxiety. We searched the neighborhood park, the temple she often visited, and the lakeside where she used to exercise in the mornings. The rain lashed at our faces, our clothes were soaked, but no one dared to stop. Khan ran and shouted, "Mom, Mom, if you can hear me, please answer." His voice broke through the rain, so painful that I could barely breathe. Nearly 4 a.m., when I was freezing and nearly exhausted, my phone suddenly rang with an unknown number on the screen. I answered immediately. On the other end was a raspy male voice, speaking very slowly. "If you want to see Mrs. Wei, come to the old warehouse behind the wholesale market. Come as 2 people only, and bring money." My heart seemed to stop. I gripped the phone tightly. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Who are you? Where is my mother?" A soft laugh came from the other end. Then another sound emerged in the background. It was my mother-in-law sobbing, her voice so weak it was almost incoherent. "Tu, don't come. Then the call cut off abruptly. I stood frozen in the rain. Khan looked at my expression and immediately knew something was wrong. He grabbed my shoulders, his voice trembling. "Where's Mom?" I looked at him, every word coming out heavy as stone. "They have her." And this time, the caller wasn't Hai Dang. The moment the call ended, my legs went weak, but after a few seconds, I forced myself to snap out of it. If I panicked like Khan right now, there would be no one left calm enough to save my mother-in-law. I gripped my phone, took a deep breath, and told my husband, "Listen to me, if you want to save Mom, don't rush off like a madman." Khan looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. "They've taken my mother. How can you tell me to be calm?" I understood his pain and his fear, but I still had to keep my voice steady. The more you lose your cool, the easier it is for them to manipulate us. They chose to call me, meaning they knew you'd lose your head. We have to do the opposite of what they want. I pulled Khan under the awning of a closed shop to escape the rain and immediately called Ms. Han. She picked up quickly. Perhaps she hadn't slept since hearing my mother-in-law went missing. I briefly recounted the call, the location at the old warehouse behind the market, and the demand for money and 2 people. Han was silent for a few seconds, then said, Don't go in alone, buy some time, and record every follow-up call. I'll call my legal contacts and alert support immediately." I understood that I couldn't just rely on my emotions. I turned on call recording, saved the stranger's number, and took a screenshot to send to Han. After that, I called Aunt 2, asking her to watch Little Society and absolutely not let him know what happened. While waiting for her, I ran home to get an old cloth bag, placing a stack of real money on top with white paper underneath. It wasn't to swindle anyone, but to buy time if they forced us to hand over the money. Khan watched me prepare, his voice hoarse. "Let me go alone." I turned to look at him. "No, they called my name. That means they want me there. If you go alone and lose control, everything is ruined." He gripped my hand tightly. "I don't want you to be in danger," I replied slowly. "I'm not going because I want to be a hero. I'm going because she is your mother and Sok's grandmother. She was wrong to me, but I can't let her die at the hands of bad people and then look at our child with a clear conscience." That sentence made Khan fall silent. I saw both pain and gratitude in his eyes. He bowed his head, his voice softened. "I owe you so much." I didn't want to talk about debts now, just told him to bring his mother home first. The rest can be figured out once we're behind our own door. Before leaving, I went into little Sok's room. She was still sound asleep, hugging her old teddy bear. I pulled the blanket up for her and leaned down to kiss her forehead. My heart ached. Only a mother truly understands. Adults can be wrong, can be weak, but children don't deserve to bear the storms caused by adults. I whispered, "Mommy is going to pick up Grandma, be a good girl." Around 5 a.m., we drove near the wholesale market area. It was still drizzling, with yellow streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. The old warehouse area behind the market, usually noisy with trucks by day, was now hauntingly empty. Rows of faded corrugated iron, rusted doors, and the smell of mold and trash in the wind sent chills down my spine. I didn't let Khan drive straight in. We stopped some distance away, turned off the lights, and observed from afar. At the end of the warehouse row was a dark pickup truck parked behind a stack of wooden pallets. The headlights were off, but occasionally a phone light flashed inside the cabin. I took a picture of the license plate and sent it to Han along with our current location. Then I added a message: "If you don't hear from me in 10 minutes, report it immediately." A few minutes later, the unknown number called again. I turned on the recording and answered. A hoarse man's voice rang out. This time it was clearer. "You're here, so come in. Don't just stand outside watching. Bring the money." I tried to keep my voice just shaky enough. "I need to hear my mother speak first. I need to know she's still safe." The other end was silent for a moment, then there was noise like the phone being moved. My mother-in-law's voice came through, weak and choked up. Don't come in." "I'm sorry." Immediately after, the man's voice snapped. "That's enough." I tightened my grip on my bag strap. Khan nearly lunged forward the moment he heard his mother's voice. I grabbed his arm and looked him straight in the eyes. "Promise me you'll listen to me once we're inside. No matter what they say, don't strike first." Khan breathed heavily but finally nodded. I stepped out of the car, bag of money in hand. The cold wind whipped my face, sharpening my senses, as every step toward the warehouse felt like walking into a beast's open jaws. Khan stayed right beside me, his entire body tense. At the warehouse entrance, a tall man stood waiting, wearing a black coat and a baseball cap pulled low over half his face. He glanced at the bag in my hand and smirked. "Smart move." I asked, "Where is my mother?" He didn't answer, only jerked his chin toward the inside. I recognized his voice as the one who called. It wasn't Hai Dang. This guy was craftier, meaner, and his eyes were much colder. As he turned to lead the way, I saw a long scar on the side of his neck. I remembered what Mrs. Hongvan said over the phone after hearing the recording. There was a guy named Fuck who specialized in handling victims who resisted. Inside the dark warehouse, a single bulb hung dangling from the ceiling. My mother-in-law was tied to a plastic chair. Part of her coat was wet, her hair matted to her face, and her eyes were swollen red from crying. The moment she saw us, she shook her head repeatedly, tears streaming down. I choked back a sob, not daring to rush over for fear of provoking them. Hai Dang stood beside her with bruises still visible from the night he was subdued at home, but what chilled me more was that Mai Lan was there too. She sat on a folding chair, draped in a black raincoat, her face made up so meticulously it looked out of place in the damp, dingy warehouse. Seeing me, she gave a faint smile. "What a good daughter-in-law. Your mother-in-law has mistreated you for years, yet you still bring money to save her." I looked at her and replied calmly, "I am here to save family. As for how she wronged me in the past, that is a private family matter. It is not for an outsider like you to make a spectacle of." Mai Lan's smile faltered for a brief moment. My mother-in-law began to weep even louder. I know she is ashamed and in pain, but right now, I cannot let my emotions pull me down with her. I placed the bag of money on the iron table near the door, intentionally leaving the strap facing outward, where the small tracking device hidden inside could still catch a signal. The man named Fuck stepped forward to open the bag, glancing at me with a cold tone. "If the money is enough, the old woman goes free. If it's short, your whole family stays here to hear the rest of the story." I looked at my mother-in-law, then at Khan, silently praying that Han had received the location. Because from the moment I stepped in here, I understood one thing. They don't just want money, they want us silenced forever. Fuck pulled the fabric bag toward him, unzipping it very slowly. In the warehouse, there was only the sound of rain tapping on the tin roof and my mother-in-law's heavy breathing. I stood still, my hands ice cold, but I tried not to show any panic. If I tremble too much, they will immediately know they hold the upper hand. If I am too calm, they will also become suspicious. I have to play the part of a daughter-in-law who is scared but still trying to negotiate to save others. Fuck flipped through the layer of cash on top, his eyes softening slightly, but when he reached deeper and touched the white paper underneath, his face changed instantly. He grabbed the stack of paper and threw it onto the warehouse floor, roaring, "Are you messing with me?" Khan immediately stepped in front of me, but Hai Dang rushed from behind, joining Fuck to restrain him. Khan struggled hard, causing the iron chair next to him to fall, the sound echoing harshly. My mother-in-law screamed, "Don't hit my son, I'll sign, is that enough?" She struggled in her chair so much that the ropes cut deep into her wrists. I turned sharply to her and said loudly, "Mother, don't sign. If you sign now, you are burying yourself and our whole family." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "But Khan, they're hitting Khan." I choked up but had to remain firm. "You were wrong once because of your pride, don't be wrong again out of fear for your son. If you want to save him, you must not sign under any circumstances." Mai Lan stood up and approached me, her eyes icy and sharp. "The daughter-in-law of this house certainly has a sharp tongue. Your mother-in-law is tied up right in front of you, yet you're still calculating paperwork." I looked her straight in the eye. "I was calculating because I wanted her to survive after today. You are the ones using sentiment to force a vulnerable person to sign away their life." Mai Lan sneered. "Vulnerable? Do you think she's that pitiful? She sought out a younger man herself, threw money away to buy love, and now that she's been scammed, she acts all innocent." Those words struck my mother-in-law deeply. I saw her bow her head, her shoulders trembling, but I wouldn't let her continue crushing the little spirit Mrs. Wei had left. I enunciated every word clearly. She was wrong to be naive and vain, but being wrong doesn't give you the right to deceive, bind, threaten, and force her to sign papers. The world might laugh at her for a few days, but the law won't laugh at your crimes. Hearing this, Fuck grew even more enraged. He grabbed Khan by the collar, gritting his teeth. "The law? Let's see if the law arrives faster than your husband's bones break. Hai Dang held Khan's arms tightly from behind, still trying to sound hypocritical. 2. Stop making things difficult. If your mother compensates voluntarily, everything will be fine. The more you resist, the more she suffers. I glanced quickly toward the handbag on the iron table. The tracking device was still inside the strap. I don't know how far Han has traced us, nor do I know if backup will arrive in time. I need to buy more time. I lowered my voice, acting as if I were backing down. If you want me to sign the papers, that's fine, but first, untie my mother so she can have some water. Look at her. If she faints here, who will confirm the voluntary agreement? Mai Lan stared at me for a long time. She isn't stupid, but her greed forced her to reconsider. Finally, she gestured to Hai Dang. Give her water, but don't untie her completely. Hai Dang let go of Khan with one hand, walked over, and held the water bottle to Mrs. Wei's mouth. She turned her face away, refusing to drink. I stepped forward. Let me. Fuck immediately blocked me. Stay put. I looked at my mother-in-law, trying to reassure her with my eyes. Mrs. Wei suddenly raised her head, her voice trembling but clearer than before. Lan, I once treated you like family. If you hate me, just say it to my face. Why must you harm me to this extent? Mai Lan froze in the warehouse. The sound of rain grew more intense. She curled her lip. Because I want you to taste what it's like to be looked down upon. You've been high and mighty for too long. Wei. That confession was both poisonous and cold. I realized I had to make her say more. I asked if Hai had been her man from the start. Mai Lan turned toward me, perhaps thinking we were already in her grip. She didn't bother hiding it anymore. He knows how to get things done. Someone like your mother-in-law only needs a few compliments, a bouquet, and a few nights of fake infatuation to open the safe herself. Who can she blame? My mother-in-law closed her eyes, tears falling silently, while I could clearly hear my own heart beating. Those words, if recorded, would be very important evidence. I just prayed that the phone in my jacket pocket was still recording well. Just as Fuck was about to force Khan to his knees to make me sign the papers. Outside the warehouse, the sound of tires crunching on gravel suddenly echoed. Fuck froze. Hai Dang also whipped his head toward the door. Mai Lan's expression changed quickly, but she tried to remain calm. Who's there? No one answered. Just a few seconds later, a bright flashlight swept across the metal door gap, lighting up the entire warehouse. A stern, cold voice rang out from outside. Everyone stay put, nobody move. Fuck cursed, let go of Khan, and prepared to rush to the back door, but as he turned, he stopped because that entrance was also lit up. Hai Dang panicked and backed against the wall. Mai Lan stood paralyzed, her elegant face now suddenly twisted and ugly. Ms. Han appeared behind the authorities, her raincoat soaked, her face pale with worry. Seeing that I was still standing, she breathed a sigh of relief. Mrs. Hongvan was also present, standing just outside the warehouse door, her eyes red but very resolute. I immediately understood that she was the one who helped identify Fuck and provided leads to help them respond faster. Khan rushed over to untie his mother. As soon as the ropes were removed, Mrs. Wei collapsed. I quickly caught her. She clung tightly to my arm, sobbing like a child. 2. I'm sorry, I have made you both suffer. I did not offer any words of forgiveness. It wasn't the right time yet, so I just draped my coat over her shoulders to keep her steady and whispered, as long as you're alive, that's what matters. We'll figure everything else out one step at a time. On the other side, Fuck was subdued the moment he tried to resist. Hai Dang loudly claimed he was forced into it, while Mai Lan remained terrifyingly silent. But I knew that silence wasn't regret. It was the calculation of someone who realized they could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. As soon as Fuck was restrained, Hai Dang instantly turned into a different person. Just minutes ago, he was holding Khan tight and standing coldly by my mother-in-law like someone in control of life and death. Yet, the moment he saw the authorities swarm in, he backed against the wall, raised his hands, and said with a trembling voice, I was forced to. I only followed Ms. Mai Lan's orders. I'm not the ringleader. Mai Lan snapped her head toward him, her face stripped of its usual elegance, replaced only by the malice and panic of someone being backstabbed by their accomplice. She gritted her teeth. Say that again. Who gave you money? Who provided for you? Who taught you how to talk to those lonely old ladies? Now you're dumping everything on me? Hai Dang immediately retorted, if you hadn't given me the list and told me to approach each one, how would I have known who had money, who was a widow, or who was afraid of losing face. The entire warehouse went silent for a few seconds. They had confirmed with their own mouths what we had long suspected. I looked at my mother-in-law, Ms. Wei. She couldn't stand steadily and had to lean on Khan's shoulder, but her eyes remained wide, watching the two people she had once trusted now tearing each other apart without a shred of loyalty. Perhaps that moment was even more painful than when she first realized she had been tied up, because it wasn't just money that was breaking, but her trust. Fuck was held down but still tried to struggle, cursing incessantly. They recovered another phone from his person. When they opened it, there were numerous videos, photos of documents, and conversations with the victims inside. Ms. Hongvan stood outside the warehouse door, her hands trembling violently at the sight of that phone. An officer asked if she recognized this device. She choked out, "That's it. 2 years ago, they used a phone just like that to threaten me." Ms. Hongvan stepped into the warehouse, each step very slow, as if gathering all her courage. Standing before Hai Dang, she stared at him for a long time. Hai Dang avoided her gaze but still tried to force a smile. Quote, "Van, you misunderstood Lam. Back then, it was voluntary." Ms. Hongvan raised her hand and slapped him hard. The sound echoed sharply through the warehouse. She spoke, her voice trembling but clear. 2 years ago I was silent because I was ashamed, but today I will be silent no more. I will not let you use the word voluntary to cover your crimes ever again. That statement gave me goosebumps. I saw a subtle change in my mother-in-law's eyes. Moments ago, she was still hanging her head in humiliation, but as she watched Ms. Hongvan stand up to face the one who once harmed her, she seemed to realize that shame is no reason to be silent. The victim is not guilty for having longed to be loved. The guilty ones are those who turned that longing into a trap. Mai Lan still refused to give up at this point. She turned to my mother-in-law, her voice sharp as a blade. "Wei, do you think your daughter-in-law saved you because she actually loves you? She only wants to please her husband. How many years have you scolded her and looked down on her? Have you forgotten? She is waiting for this chance to see you lose face." Khan immediately tried to retort, but I reached out to stop him. I wanted to hear my mother-in-law answer for herself. Ms. Wei looked up, her face pale, but her eyes were no longer entirely weak. She looked at Mai Lan and said very softly, "She may not love me like her own mother. I have never been kind enough to her to demand that. But she did not abandon me in this warehouse. Yet you, someone I called a sister, sold me to those scammers." Mai Lan was left speechless. That sentence was not loud, nor aggressive, but it struck right at the mask of friendship she had worn for years. Standing nearby, my heart suddenly felt heavy. I didn't need my mother-in-law to say grand, lofty things. All I needed then was for you to see who was real and who was fake. Realizing he couldn't rely on Mai Lan, Hai Dang turned to the police to spill everything. He claimed he was just hired to play the role of a companion. He said he didn't know at first they were using his info for fraud, but Ms. Han produced copies of messages that Hong Van had provided. In them, Hai Dang clearly discussed how to approach victims, how to feign affection, and how to demand small transfers to avoid suspicion. Seeing those lines, his face turned pale, his mouth still trying to stammer. These messages could have been edited. Fuck sneered from behind, "Stop acting, you took the biggest cut and now you're playing innocent." That remark made Hai Dang turn and lash out at Fuck. In just one morning, these three accomplices began exposing each other, with no secrets left. Watching that scene made me shudder. People who live by deceit are the first to throw their own partners under the bus when in danger. The officers drew up a report, seizing bags of documents, contracts, phones, and a list of money-receiving accounts. One of them asked if I was injured. I shook my head and looked over at Khan. He was taking off his jacket for his mother, his hands still trembling. Bao Wei clung tightly to his arm, repeating over and over, "I'm sorry, my son, I'm sorry, too, I'm sorry, society." I stepped forward to support her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with shame. Quote, "Two, if you hadn't come," I cut her off, my voice soft but firm. "Mother, say no more, let's get out of here first." Some apologies belong in a warm home, not in a cold warehouse reeking of mold and crime. As we took my mother-in-law outside, the rain had eased. The pale morning light covered the path behind the market, making everything feel both real and like a nightmare just fading away. Ms. Hongvan stood beside me and whispered, "You're lucky you dared to rush in and save your mother-in-law. Back then, I had no one to pull me back." I looked at her and could only reply, "From now on, you are not alone anymore." On the way back, no one said a word in the car. Con drove with red, huffy eyes. My mother-in-law sat in the back, and I sat beside her so she could lean on my shoulder. Her hands were ice cold and would tremble every now and then. I didn't hug her tightly, nor did I offer any hasty words of forgiveness. I simply held her hand so she would know that, at the very least, she still had family by her side. The worst of the storm may not have passed yet. Because after saving her, we still have to face testimonies and evidence. Money has been lost, reputations damaged, and the family is left with cracks. But as I watched my mother-in-law lean against me with her eyes closed, I understood one thing. Sometimes, dealing with people isn't about forgetting every mistake, but knowing when to save someone first before settling accounts of right and wrong. After that morning at the warehouse, my mother-in-law had to go to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor said she was suffering from exhaustion, bruised wrists, and low blood pressure due to panic and prolonged sleep deprivation. There were no life-threatening injuries, but her spirit was nearly completely broken. She lay in the hospital bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, barely nodding or shaking her head when spoken to. The woman who once loved to talk, lecture, and maintain a superior air is now so silent that it breaks my heart. Con sat by his mother's bedside, his hands tightly clasped together. Several times, he started to say something, then stopped. Perhaps he is feeling a mix of love, anger, and regret. Love because his mother was left broken and frail. Anger because she hid everything from the family and walked into a trap. Regret because he dismissed all the earlier warning signs, only to break in when it was already too late. I didn't say much. I knew that at this moment, a single word of blame could cause Mrs. Wei to collapse completely, but silence doesn't mean letting it slide. While Con was at the hospital, Ms. Han and I began reviewing all the paperwork, from the prenuptial agreement, bank transfer slips, and messages between Mrs. Wei and Hai Dang, to the investment commitment she hadn't yet fingerprinted. Ms. Han made it clear that if she had transferred the money herself, it would be difficult to recover immediately. But for documents signed under signs of coercion or threats, we must file supplementary statements as soon as possible. I listened and took it one step at a time. I photocopied the documents, noted the dates, and organized the evidence into separate files. There were files on Hai Dang, My Lan, Fuck, and separate files for financial transactions. The more I worked on it, the more terrified I became. They did not act recklessly. Every message, every investment suggestion, and every statement of consent was carefully staged so that if things were exposed, they could wash their hands of it and claim the victim agreed. 2 days later, Mrs. Wei was brought home. Before entering the gate, she stood still for a very long time. Her gaze rested on the second floor, the room she had once turned into a forbidden zone, which nearly became the burial ground for her reputation and assets. She trembled, unable to take another step. I walked over to take her arm and whispered, "Let's go inside, Mom. Our home is not at fault. The ones at fault are those who took advantage of you." She looked at me, eyes red, and asked, "Is our house still our home, my child?" That question made me choke up. I knew she wasn't just asking about the house. She was asking if, after everything, she still had a place in this family. I replied very slowly, quote, "It is, provided that from now on, no one hides anything that could harm the family from anyone else." She nodded, and tears fell. It wasn't a grand promise, but it was the first time she agreed to let me set a clear boundary. In the days that followed, relatives kept calling. Some truly wanted to check on her, but others just wanted more gossip to spread. Con wanted to block everyone, saying we had to protect his mother's honor. I pulled him into the kitchen. I told him straight, keeping one's honor is not the same as pretending nothing happened. We don't need to tell the whole world, but with the law, the bank, and those who could be the next victims, we must be clear. He looked at me for a long time and then nodded, quote, "From now on, I will face this with you. I won't hide things on my own anymore." That statement meant more to me than any apology ever could. Because for many years, what wore me out wasn't just having a difficult mother-in-law, but the feeling that Con would always take a step back whenever he needed to protect his wife and child. Now, after everything, he began to realize that forbearance isn't always filial piety, and silence isn't always about keeping the home together. Ms. Hong Van also returned. This time, she no longer had the timid appearance she had on the first day. She brought along more of her records and a list of several women who had messaged her after hearing news that Hai was arrested. Some still didn't dare to show their faces, but were ready to provide bank transfers and text messages. She said to my mother-in-law, "We endure the shame once so others won't be deceived later. If we stay silent, they'll just find someone else to harm. Hearing this, my mother-in-law's eyes turned red again. She held Ms. Hongvan's hand and said in a very soft voice, "I'm afraid people will laugh." Ms. Hongvan replied, "They will laugh for a few days then forget, but if we stay silent, we will mock ourselves for a lifetime." That remark left Mrs. Wei silent for a long time. Finally, she nodded, agreeing to join her name in the supplementary complaint. That evening, when things were temporarily settled, I was cleaning the kitchen when Mrs. Wei walked in. In her hand was a bowl of hot chicken porridge. She placed it in front of me, her voice hesitant. "I cooked this for you. You've been running around these past few days for my sake and must be exhausted." I looked at the bowl of porridge, a very strange feeling in my heart. This was perhaps the first time in many years as a daughter-in-law that she had proactively cooked something for me, not to order me around, nor to save face in front of others. I did not rush to take the bowl. She understood, so she lowered her head, her hands clutching the edge of her shirt. Quote, "In the past, I often said you were ungrateful. In truth, the person who was unreasonable was me. I feared getting old, getting ugly, being unwanted, and then I took that fear out on you. I thought your tolerance meant you were weak, so I pushed you even further. Only when you were the one who rushed in to save me did I realize how terrible I had been." I remained silent for a long time, not because I wanted to act superior, but because old wounds cannot heal instantly with just a few words of apology. I spoke honestly, "I can take care of you in your time of trouble, but I cannot return to being the person you can scold or suspect whenever you want. From now on, things in this house must be clear. I respect you, Mother, but you must respect me too." Ms. Wei nodded repeatedly, tears falling into her bowl of porridge. "I know, I dare not ask for your forgiveness right away." Just then, Khan stood outside the kitchen door, having likely heard everything. He walked in, his voice hoarse. "It's not just Mother who is wrong. I am wrong too. I thought that making you endure it would keep the family peaceful. It turns out I let my wife suffer alone for too long." I looked at my husband. This time, I no longer saw him avoiding my gaze. I said, "I don't need you to oppose your mother. I just need you to stand by me when your wife is being hurt." Khan nodded, his eyes reddening. That night, for the first time in many years, my kitchen was no longer a place where I silently swallowed my sorrows. It became a place where 3 adults sat and faced their mistakes. No one can fix the entire past in a single night. But at least from that night on, this house began to have something it had previously lacked: the truth. A few weeks later, we were invited to a confrontation session to finalize the case file. That morning, my mother-in-law wore a modest colored shirt, her hair neatly tied, with faint bruises still visible on her wrists. She stood before the mirror for a long time, not to admire herself as before, but as if reminding herself to be brave enough to walk through a difficult path. I handed her a thin scarf. She took it and said softly, "Please come with me." I nodded, no further words needed. Sometimes, just being there by someone's side is an answer in itself. At the confrontation session, Dang still tried to maintain a pitiful appearance. He claimed he was just a young man used by Mai Lan, that his feelings for my mother-in-law were real, and that money only messed things up. But when Ms. Han presented the message transcripts, bank transfer history, and exchanges on how to approach each victim, he hung his head low. The beautiful words of the past fell away, leaving only a face of pathetic cowardice. Mai Lan also did not admit her guilt immediately. She claimed she only introduced friends and knew nothing of Dang's fraud, but the recording from the warehouse and the money flowing into her account made every denial sound feeble. Ms. Hongvan and several other women stepped forward to testify one by one. Some spoke through tears, others kept their heads down in shame, but in the end, they all chose not to remain silent anymore. The final piece of the puzzle came from something no one expected. In Baby Sock's old phone, there was a recording he had accidentally triggered while playing near the stairs. The audio wasn't long, but it clearly captured Dang's voice threatening my mother-in-law. Quote, "Sign it, or I'll send this clip to your entire family." When the recording played, my mother-in-law burst into tears. She wasn't crying out of fear anymore, but because she knew her grandson had heard those terrifying words in their own home. The case was subsequently handled by the authorities. Some of the money was successfully frozen, though not all of it could be recovered. My mother-in-law didn't blame anyone. She took the initiative to sell some of her jewelry, not to save face as before, but to pay off the debts and contribute to the legal fees for the group of victims. She told me, "Think of it as tuition for my naivety. It hurts, but I'm lucky to still be alive to fix it. Some relatives still gossiped, and in the market, the alleys, and over tea, her story became a subject for many to whisper about. But this time, Mrs. Wade didn't fight back, nor did she lock herself away to hide as before. One day, hearing someone drop hints, she calmly replied, "I admit my mistakes, but I'm not ashamed to have stood up to denounce the one who harmed me." Watching her then, I suddenly felt a sense of relief in my heart. A person can lose money, face, and even confidence, but as long as they dare to face their mistakes, they haven't lost everything. Khan also changed. He replaced the locks on the second floor and removed the auxiliary bolt that Dang had installed. He told his mother, "From now on, there are no off-limit areas in our home. We respect your privacy, but no one is to lock themselves away in danger anymore." Mrs. Wei heard this and only nodded, her eyes rimmed with red. Life is gradually returning to normal, but not the same kind of normal as before. Mrs. Wei no longer scrutinizes my every move. There was a day I made the soup a bit salty. She almost said something but stopped, then just added a little water to her bowl. I saw it and just smiled. The changes in older people are sometimes quiet. They lie in very small things, so small that if you aren't paying attention, you wouldn't notice. Every afternoon, she asks to be the one to pick up little Society. At first, the child was a bit afraid and kept clutching my hand, but she was very patient. She bought the child a carton of milk, told stories from the past, and gently said, "I scared you that day, I'm sorry." Little Society looked at her for a long time, then hugged her neck. I stood behind them, my eyes stinging. One weekend afternoon, the whole family sat down to eat. The meal didn't have anything fancy, just braised fish, vegetable soup, and a plate of fried eggs that Society loves. Mrs. Wei picked up a piece of fish for me, her voice slightly hesitant. "Too, I don't dare to expect you to forget everything, but if you could, would you let me learn how to be a mother-in-law again?" I looked at her, then at Khan, who was silent beside me, and at little Society, who was laughing at a heart-shaped piece of egg. Deep down, there are still old scars, but they no longer bleed like before. I replied softly, "Learning takes time, mother, but as long as you are sincere, I won't close the door." She bowed her head, tears falling, but her lips curled into a faint smile. "After everything, I understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting all the hurt, nor does it mean turning a blind eye to every mistake. Forgiveness is sometimes just keeping a path open for each other to return, when the other person truly knows they were wrong and is willing to change. A family is not a place where there are never any storms. A family is the place you return to after the storm. If we still love each other sincerely enough, we will pick up the pieces together and slowly rebuild our home.